Hi. So there's this joke I've been telling recently. Not long after my book came out, a few months later, actually, my wife and I had our first baby. And a few nights after that, I found myself up in the middle of the night. I'm holding this screaming beast, and there's poop everywhere. And I had this thought, which is the title of my next book is going to be Everything in My Last Book Was Bullshit. Like I said, it's a joke. I still believe pretty powerfully in the importance of meditation, especially when you have a toddler around the house. But the part of the joke that actually is serious is that in the years since the book came out, I've actually started to see in hindsight that I made some errors and omissions with my first book, and I'm now intent on fixing it. I'll talk about that in a second, but just by way of background, let me get my little clicker out here. For those of you who don't know me, I started to meditate because I had a panic attack on a little show we do called Good Morning America. This is a still picture of that panic attack. If you've got an appetite for a little Schadenfreude, you can see the whole thing on YouTube anytime you want. Just type in panic attack on live television. It comes right up. Which is fucking awesome. Long story short, this freak out ultimately led me to meditation, which I had been, it was my view that meditation was only for hippies and freaks and people who are really into kombucha and ultimate frisbee. And I'm going to see if I can offend every single one of you. Cat Stevens, Enya, finger symbols, and the unironic use of the word namaste. So I wrote 10% Happier in large measure because I wanted to make meditation seem less weird. Let's see, I think I have a picture of it somewhere. There it is. I wanted to make it seem less weird. And what's interesting to me is that 3 years later, it actually does seem less weird in a lot of places. I don't give myself any of the credit for that. I think it has to do with the expanding body of research that suggests that meditation can do a lot of nice things for your brain and your body, and also because of the hard work of the people who are in this room and who've been on this stage. But now we have a new problem. So while meditation is more socially acceptable, while it's less embarrassing to say you meditate, we have got, I suspect, millions of people who are into it, who want to meditate, but who aren't actually doing it. And so this is the problem I'm really fixated on now. So to deal with this, I've done a couple of things preliminarily. As was mentioned, I started a podcast called 10% Happier, available wherever you get your podcasts. And I interview all sorts of people like the Dalai Lama, RuPaul, Robin Roberts, one of my colleagues on Good Morning America, Eileen Fisher, who I believe spoke to you, about how busy people can and do fit meditation into their lives. The other thing I did, which was also mentioned, is I co-founded a company, Meditation for 10% Happier Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. And we've recruited some of the best teachers in the world, including Joseph Goldstein, Sharon Salzberg, and George Mumford. We've kind of gotten rid of the pan flutes and patchouli and try to inject a little humor into it. In fact, once in a while, we even kind of gingerly make fun of the teachers themselves, as you'll see in this outtake that Joseph Goldstein let us post on the app. Here it is. Let's see if it works.
Okay. I just have one professional question. Just from your perspective, from my perception, when Dan talks, you sit a lot stiller than I do. I feel like I'm kind of moving around a lot. Do you either notice it or doesn't it matter?
Okay. Story you're telling yourself.
What?
I call that clip When the Student Becomes the Master. So yeah, we're having a great time, we're growing fast, but we're really obsessed with this issue of why so many people say they want to meditate but aren't doing it. And I'll be honest, I find this a little confusing because This is a picture that my wife and baby mama Bianca took of me when we were on vacation in the Bahamas with some opportunistic chickens trying to like take my wallet or whatever. But for me, back in, I think, 2009, I read a John Kabat-Zinn book. I heard about the science, and I started meditating on a summer afternoon, and I don't think I've missed a day. And so it just seemed to me that if I wrote 10% Happier and made a good argument, I mean, there are no original ideas in 10% Happier. I stole it all from a guy like named the Buddha and put the word fuck in a lot. I just thought that if I made a lot of good arguments and made it normal, I'm a guy in a suit and tie, that people would hear the argument and start meditating the way I did. But this was incredibly naive, and I was wrong. Really wrong about that. And it turns out I'm a bit of a mutant when it comes to behavior change. So I love this quote from my new friend at Google, Bill Duane, who a lot of you may know. He says that, we have the medicine that works and most people don't do it. The problem, we have a massive compliance issue. So, yeah. So recently, my team and I at 10% Happier, we decided that we needed to do something a little bit more radical to sort of research this problem and see what we could do about it. So we teamed up with one of my favorite meditation teachers on earth, a guy named Jeff Warren. He looks really serious in this picture, but he's a total goofball, just so you know. He's in Toronto. He's an amazing, amazing meditation teacher. So Jeff and I and a whole bunch of other people, we got this ridiculous piece of hardware, a bus that we wrapped with the 10% Happier logo. Side note, the previous occupants of this bus was a funk band called Parliament Funkadelic. Yeah. I was told by the driver that we were the most boring people he's ever driven. So we went across the country in this bus just a few weeks ago, and the mission was to do a taxonomy of jacked up meditators, to find out, to catalog all the reasons people who want to meditate but aren't meditating. What are the reasons they're not doing it? And also to sort of hone our rebuttals and see what we could do to unblock people. So today, and this is the first time I'm giving this talk, because I'm going to present our preliminary research. We found a number of myths and misconceptions and self-deceptions that get in the way of meditating, and so I'm going to run through them. Myth number one is something that I'm sure a lot of you have heard, which is I suck at this. I hear this all the time. People come and say, you don't understand, my mind is so busy, I could never do this. I call this the fallacy of uniqueness. Welcome to the human condition. We're all insane. And this problem we found in a pretty stark fashion when we sat down and taught meditation to my co-anchors on Weekend Good Morning America on the first day of our tour. And you're going to hear from my co-host, Paula Ferris, who, for the first time, I've never seen anybody do this. She turned the actual meditation session into a call and response. So here we go.
Okay, so just taking a moment to settle into the sitting posture.
You can shift, can't you?
Yeah.
Okay.
So just breathing naturally. And that's that openness is the place to begin. And then you just sort of select a sensation to work with.
So when I'm feeling a distraction, like I can feel I feel like I can always feel my stomach hanging over, or I can just heard Ron's stomach growl. I'm feeling what do I do with all of those distractions?
It's a great question. So first, find this composure that allows all those distractions to be there. Bring my attention back into some sensation in the body. And when you guys are ready, you feel ready, you can slowly open your eyes and rejoin the stream.
My back hurts.
It's hard to practice when your body's in pain. That's why, it's helpful to be in a comfortable place where you feel...
Not in a dress and heels, possibly?
Right.
I work with her a lot, and so now you know what I'm dealing with. So while most of her questions were logistical, during the course of our interview there, the bedrock concern that emerged for her was that she just feels like her mind's too crazy. I think she referred to herself as a deranged chipmunk. And so I think this is low-hanging fruit, actually. I think we've been ill-served by the traditional art around meditation that has created this impression that in order to meditate, you need to clear your mind and float off into the cosmos. I have a picture that I particularly like to use. There it is, that one. People think that you're going to look like this if you're meditating correctly. Let me just say as a side note, I was excited that Time Magazine covered mindfulness in this way, but a little annoyed that it sends the message that meditation is only for, white people who live on the Upper West Side of Manhattan and shop at Whole Foods. And I don't say that with any malice because I am a white person who lives on the Upper West Side and shops at Whole Foods. But meditation was invented thousands of years ago by Indian people, and it's for everybody. So, thank you. All right, I'll get off my high horse and just get back to the point that this and millennia of art like it, with people with these beatific looks on their faces floating off into the cosmos, sends the message that meditation requires clearing the mind. And I think there's a great counter-argument here, which is, no, you don't have to clear the mind. That's impossible unless you're enlightened or dead. The point is to focus your mind for nanoseconds at a time on usually the feeling of your breath, and then when you get lost, which you will a million times, you just start again and again and again. And it's hard. And I think a better way to represent the experience of meditation is this. I think about it a little bit like going to the gym. If you go to the gym and you're not panting or sweating, then you're cheating. And this is, for beginning meditators, it's okay to struggle and suffer a little bit because any new skill is going to require a bit of an awkward period. At 10% Happier, we really try to reframe the moment of waking up from being distracted as a win. That what you think of as quote-unquote failure is actually success. And we found in the course of our road trip that this is a really compelling argument for people to hear. So myth number 2 is a huge one, and it's that I don't have time for this. This is really a big one, and I'll try to unpack it a little bit. But first, let me play you another video clip. This is what we heard from a busy mom when we went back to my old high school, Newton South High School, where I was a D student, and met with the community. And here's what one mother had to say.
So I have another archetype of messed up meditators.
Cool.
Parents.
All parents?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, your own parents.
No, me as a parent.
Yeah.
So when I read your book, when it first came out, I loved it, but there was a part of me that couldn't relate to it, and it wasn't because you were interviewing like the Dalai Lama and Eckhart Tolle. It was because at that point you weren't a parent.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's so nice. He can go away on a 10-day retreat.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't have a kid at home. And then you told the story. I saw you talk with Joseph Goldstein. You told the story about the baby in the middle of the night and the poop, and it's all bullshit. And I was like, okay, now I forgive him, and now we're like on the same page. But the biggest obstacle for me is I have 2 young kids.
Yeah.
And they have this like radar. And I crawl out of bed so quietly in the morning, and I just like shuffle one foot over to my cushion, and they sense it. And they're there. And I think a lot about your wife. And I've never met her, but I've heard you talk about how long you meditate each day. And I'm like, wow, she puts up with that. Because, my husband, I love him.
Totally.
But if he was, like, as much as I want him to be enlightened, I want him to unload the dishwasher. And if he was like, I'm going to meditate for an hour, I'd be like, no, you're really not. So
if he got too enlightened, he might not be able to unload the
That's
dishwasher.
right, that's
It's like,
right.
Dishwashers, loading, unloading.
So I would love to hear if you want to speak a little bit about how your practice has changed since you became a father, and or any advice you have for parents, because that's the biggest thing for me.
That's great. So what's your name?
Carla.
Carla. So one thing immediately that I think would be like an easy fix is like, have you ever thought about giving your kids up for adoption?
Yes, I have. Yep. Not as easy as you'd think. Yeah.
So I didn't really offer a lot of useful advice in that particular scenario because I will always take the low-hanging fruit of a joke. But there are 2 arguments that we tested out in the course of these 11 days we traveled across the country that really do seem to work with people. One is you can really see the light go on in people's eyes when you tell them that 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute meditations count. which is why on our app we've got 1, 2, 3-minute meditations. Obviously, I think we would like to see people doing 5, 10, 15 minutes a day. That would be great, but we got to meet people where they are. The other argument that we found that really helped people was to think about slots in the day where meditation can fit in really nicely that you may not have considered. Right after the kids go to sleep, right before you go to sleep, right when you wake up in the morning, close your door in your office if you have one for a minute right before lunch, right before you get out of your car and go into your home, and while stay in your car, do a couple minutes there. And once we explain this to people, they realize that actually if they think about their schedule holistically, they have more time than they think they have. But time is a really tricky issue because when people say they don't have time, they actually are often saying a number of other things. They're saying, I don't want to make time for this. I'm not sure this is actually going to work for me. And here's a big and deep psychology. What they're saying is, I don't deserve this, which leads to myth number 3, which is that meditation is self-indulgent navel-gazing, which is a way of saying that I don't deserve the self-care. And listen to what we heard from a mom and social worker in Las Cruces, New Mexico.
Many directions, and I'm a perfectionist, and I want to give my all to everyone at work. My home, my family means everything to me. So I always want to make sure my husband's okay, my child's okay, my family, my clients are okay, that I feel like taking those 5 minutes, I feel so guilty. Because as I'm sitting there going, yes, I'm taking these 5 minutes, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I could have been planning for therapy. I could have been maybe coming up with more things to do with my baby. I could have given my husband 5 minutes of, well, how was your day? Let's chat about your things. So guilt has been my biggest barrier on, as soon as I start to relax, I think, oh my goodness, I shouldn't be relaxing. I should be doing, this is so bad. Why am I so selfish? That's my biggest barrier. So I don't know if you have any advice on how do you take care of that voice, the guilt voice.
This is a really interesting and deep psychology. However, actually the pushback is pretty simple, which is if you care about being of service, and this woman clearly does, you can't be of service to others if you don't help yourself first. It's that old cliche that you hear in the airline safety instructions. You got to put your own oxygen mask on before assisting others. And once we explained that to her and lots of other folks, we found that they started to see this thing a little differently. Okay, so myth number 4 is a little bit lighter, which is that people are going to think I'm weird if I meditate. Listen to what we heard from a cop in Tempe, Arizona. Do you think on the force, it's, meditation is considered, socially acceptable, or would people make fun of you a little bit? You could be honest.
I think people are going to make fun of you just a little bit.
What do you think? Even though the chief is into it?
I think even though the chief is into it, I think, as cops, we're like, wait, huh?
Is the idea, do you think people think if you're meditating that you're going to kind of go soft a little bit?
Hey, I would say yes.
Yeah.
I think that is, a factor for sure,
Okay, so the rebuttal here is a good one, which is that think about all the crazy successful people who are meditating, and they definitely haven't lost their edge in business and sports and entertainment and the U.S. military. I love pointing out that 50 Cent meditates. That dude got shot 9 times. I believe he deserves some peace of mind. As an aside, this argument, which again really does work, reminds me of the argument I've been making my whole life over the fact that I'm a guy who likes cats. And people have been making fun of me for that for a long time. In fact, I wrote about this in my book. When my wife and I adopted some ASPCA cats, one of my colleagues sent me an email that said, "Do you sit when you pee?" And my tactic has always been to point out that a lot of tough guys like cats. Winston Churchill, Don Corleone, Dr. Evil, ladies and gentlemen. But this fear of looking soft is actually is linked to a deeper myth, which is that if I get too happy, I'm going to lose my edge. And we talked about this a little bit with a guy you might have heard of who's a multi-platinum recording artist by the name of Josh Groban, who articulated this fear really well.
I'd worked with, producers like Rick Rubin and people like that who have meditated their entire lives since they were children. And if they don't do it, they feel something's missing in their day. But at the same time, he's a very laid-back man, and there are people that I know that do it daily, and they are so zen about the world and so laid back about their surroundings. And I feel like that's not really who I am. I've always been one of those people where the spin has always been my edge, I've always, for whatever reason, rightly or wrongly, I've felt like that the anxiety has been an edge for me that has allowed me to chess game my life a little better, and so the idea of laying back at all is actually it's a fear of mine that if I sit back too far, I'll miss out.
You're a brother from another mother. And this is exactly my psychology for sure. Let me just amplify his point, or the point I was making at the end there, which is this was a huge thing for me when I was writing my book. I exist in a really competitive atmosphere, and I thought if I meditated, I was going to show up at work in my wife's yoga pants or whatever, that it wasn't going to go well. The fact of the matter, there are a lot of people think that if you meditate, you're going to end up some non-judgmental, lifeless, blissed out blob. I wish that was the case. The fact is that meditation does not make all of your problems go away, does not uproot all of your anxieties unless you're at a really deep end of the pool. What it does, as a guy named Ram Dass has famously said, is it makes you a connoisseur of your neuroses. And when you see that shit clearly, it doesn't yank you around as much. And that is the samurai move. And it was, go ahead and applaud for that, fine. All right, so I'm almost done, I promise. But I just want to, we don't have time to go through all the myths we encountered, so I just want to quickly list the others. Myth number 6 is actually not a myth. We shouldn't call it that, but we've been referring to it as Pandora's box. A lot of people are worried that if they meditate, they're going to come into a full frontal collision with their deepest fears and anxieties, and that can be true. Again, I would argue, though, that it's better to see this stuff than to be blindly driven by it. But I would add that if you have serious mental health issues, it's best to work with your mental health professional before you dive into meditation too deeply. Myth number 7, blank is my meditation. I'm sure you guys hear this all the time. Oh, I don't need to meditate because I run or I garden or whatever. And my answer to that is maybe. Depends how you run. If you run like I do, where I'm just rehearsing all the curse words I want to hurl at my boss, or I'm listening to music or a podcast, then that is manifestly not meditation. If you're running and you're paying attention to the feeling of your footfalls and the wind on your face and the muscles in your body moving, cool. And every time you get distracted and you start again, that's meditation. But most people don't run like that. And myth number 8 is I can't keep it going. This is the consistency issue. Also really not a myth. It's a big problem for people. People fall off the wagon all the time. So let me play you another video clip.
I have an idea. I just came up with this in the bathroom. What if we had a kitten? If there was like a kitten that I had to keep alive by meditating every day.
On the app.
On the app. Like a little kitten, and then like every time you meditated, like he got a little stronger, and then if you didn't meditate, he like withered.
It's like a meditative Hatchimal.
Yes.
Yes.
That
okay.
would keep me meditating.
All right. That is,
Like
I think it truly, really...
Like cartoon, little paws.
Like adorable big eyes.
Big eyes.
We'll have like all these cages in the 10% offices, malnourished kittens with little kind of milk dispensers that only come out when they get their appropriate range.
That would.
All right, do we have the technology to build that, Ben?
Too much right now. We'll look at it.
Thank you, Ben.
Awesome.
I want a white one with 2 different color eyes.
I should have explained who that is. That's Bethany Watson, one of the co-hosts of one of the most popular morning top 40 radio shows in the country, Elvis Duran and the Morning Show. And so she came up with that kind of jokey idea, and we actually might build it. So those are our preliminary results. We're still honing this thing. We're going to turn it into a book that's out at New Year's. We're also going to turn it into lots of new courses for the 10% Happier app. But one thing I want to say in closing is that what we learned is that this is really important work, but it's actually delicate work too, because what you don't want to do is proselytize. We are really aiming this at people who want to meditate but are not. We are not trying to convince people who don't want to meditate that they should. I hasten to add, I live with a woman, my wife, who does not meditate, and I have learned that it's best not to lecture unless you want to get smacked in the head. So in this spirit, I will leave you with an awesome cartoon from the New Yorker magazine, which shows two women having lunch. One says to the other, "I've been gluten-free for a week, and I'm already annoying." Namaste. Let me get my little clicker out here. For those of you who don't know me, I started to meditate because I had a panic attack on a little show we do called Good Morning America. This is a still picture of that panic attack. If you've got an appetite for a little Schadenfreude, you can see the whole thing on YouTube anytime you want. Just type in panic attack on live television. It comes right up. Which is fucking awesome. Long story short, this freakout ultimately led me to meditation, which I had been, it was my view that meditation was only for hippies and freaks and people who are really into kombucha and ultimate frisbee. And I'm going to see if I can offend every single one of you. Cat Stevens, Enya, finger symbols, and the unironic use of the word namaste. Like I said, it's a joke. I still believe pretty powerfully in the importance of meditation, especially when you have a toddler around the house. But the part of the joke that actually is serious is that in the years since the book came out, I've actually started to see in hindsight that I made some errors and omissions with my first book, and I'm now intent on fixing it. I'll talk about that in a second, but just by way of background. Hi. So there's this joke I've been telling recently. Not long after my book came out, a few months later, actually, my wife and I had our first baby, and a few nights after that, I found myself up in the middle of the night. I'm holding this screaming beast, and there's poop everywhere, and I had this thought, which is the title of my next book is going to be Everything in My Last Book Was Bullshit. So I wrote 10% Happier in large measure because I wanted to make meditation seem less weird. Let's see, I think I have a picture of it somewhere. There it is. I wanted to make it seem less weird. And what's interesting to me is that 3 years later, it actually does seem less weird in a lot of places. I don't give myself any of the credit for that. I think it has to do with the expanding body of research that suggests that meditation can do a lot of nice things for your brain and your body. And also because of the hard work of the people who are in this